Aside from the non-playable characters roaming around in a video game world, doing whatever it is they do throughout the day, what else is it that breathes life into the environment around you? Quite recently, as in the video right before this one, I had a look at the pretty impressive NPCs in the game Watch Dogs 2. It was so impressive, in fact, that I didn't have time to look into any other aspects of what makes the game feel alive, so let's do that in this video instead. Consider this a kind of part 2 to that video, so if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend that you watch it first. If you don't want to, you don't have to though, I'm not the boss of you. Anyway, aside from NPCs, I also want to take a look at the human-made environment, natural environment, animals, environmental effects, sounds, and interactivity. Given that the map is a condensed version of the Bay Area, we have a lot to look at, so we're gonna jump into it straight away. Just as with the last video, since the map is so big, I'll visit a few areas that vary from one another and check them out. This way, we should be able to cover a lot of what the game has to offer despite not investigating every corner. Of course, I'm gonna start by our main hideout by Mission Dolores Park, which is hidden in the back of a pretty well-stocked game store. There's tons of board games and magazines here, as well as statues, miniatures, and posters. You sadly can't play any of these, and the most interactivity you have here is talking with a few NPCs who may berate you for your crappy card deck or tell you about their successful campaign. I do like how much clutter exists in here, even if the board games and magazines are repeats. There's still a big enough variety to make it seem like there's more than just a handful of reused designs, and the way they're naturally scattered instead of being perfectly aligned on the shelves sells it even more. Clutter is important when making a place feel alive, after all. There's a reason we tend to refer to bland, overly tidy homes as lifeless. Heading outside, if you walk past the shop, you will hear the music from inside fade in and out. Of course, you'll also hear traffic around you and some talking in the background, which makes sense for the location. You're in the middle of a busy city, after all. The cars and people have their own sounds, so you don't just hear everything from a background track. When vehicles drive past, they'll have different sounds that suit them. The loudness from a bike versus the muted noise from a bus, for example. Sometimes people will even blast music while driving, and you hear this as they pass. Then there's also NPCs that are talking to each other or who are on their phones, which we covered in the previous video. Right around the corner of the game store, we have Clarion Alley, which is a small street known for its mural project in real life, and such is made evident here. The big designs are unique. At the very least, they're not used more than once on this street, but some smaller designs are repeated, both here and in other places. They do make the world look more lived in at a glance though, if you're not like me and pay attention to them so much that you realize just how often they're reused. We can also find some trash here, which actually consists of several different designs. You'd think trash is something the devs would pay less attention to and maybe stick with one or two simple textures, but no, it's surprisingly varied. I also found some flyers on a utility pole. What I like about the small objects I've found so far is that they're readable. Such things often have low-resolution designs or symbols that we can't actually make sense of, so I'm surprised that these are legible, which may be small, but it does add to the world building. Also, the Unicorn and Dragon Pub is a location in the first Watch Dogs game, so that's a fun little nod. I spotted a balcony from here, which had some chairs and a grill on it, giving it some personality. However, the windows around don't have any decorations, no plants or anything, just plain curtains or blinds. After looking at more windows in the area, it seems the same applies everywhere. However, I did randomly see the light in one apartment turn off, so that doesn't seem fully dependent on a day and night cycle, which is neat. I went to the back garden of one apartment building to see if there was more clutter or furniture to be found, and there was. Toys, a sandbox, gardening tools by a shed, seating, and a fire pit. Things that indicate that people with families and hobbies actually live here. Even details such as electricity cables and fire escapes really help with making the environment look varied and realistic. At this point, it was dark out, so I decided to head somewhere with a bit more nightlife. There's a bar nearby by Castro Theater, and this area is actually known as one of the first gay neighborhoods in the US. There's rainbows and pops of color everywhere, and that alone makes this place feel very alive. But let's take a closer look. There's a lot of shops around, and they're pretty varied with everything from pubs to pharmacies. The architecture itself is quite varied too, each building having distinct character. A drag queen beckoned me inside the bar I came here for, And if a queen demands something of me, who am I to say no? There's less life in here than I thought there would be, but mostly in terms of NPCs and not the design itself. There's neon everywhere in this otherwise dark interior, which is a lovely contrast. There's tables with bottles and lit candles, and in the back there's a small tattoo station with a lounge above. Behind the bar, you can naturally find rows and rows of alcohol. There's a lot of detail to this place, so it's a shame that all you can really do in the bars in this game is have a beer, which doesn't affect your gameplay in any way at all. The street outside feels much busier in contrast in terms of NPCs. The lights really make it feel like a place best experienced in the nighttime, even if many shops look closed. Unfortunately, despite all the public places available, and despite how personalized and different from one another they are, the only one we can enter here is the bar. Not even the theater is open to us. Right around the corner, there's a residential area with apartments lining the streets instead of shops. There's less people around, and the neon is replaced with porch and street lights. The sound design is pretty much the same, however, aside from the music that came from the bar. That is, until some gang members rolled up with guns and the NPCs quickly dispersed. After this, the street was very quiet, and it was interesting to see just how much their disappearance affected the noise level. Shortly after, it started raining, so I decided to take a look at the environmental effects. The ground gets visibly wet when there's rain, but what's also interesting is that you can see the impact of the droplets on the ground, which is a lovely touch. Better yet, if you take a look at the streetlights, you can see the mist in the air. An additional thing I spotted here is the falling leaves coming from the trees. They land on the ground rather than just disappear, and if you park a car underneath, they land on that too. We're right by a large spot of greenery here, which leads up to Crestmont Forest. So let's take a closer look at the trees and other plants while we're at it. The first thing I tried was walking through the bushes, and thankfully they do wobble a bit as I pass, as opposed to not being affected at all. There's various types of shrubbery as well as trees, and they all sway nicely in the wind. Looking closer, they're not highly detailed, but it's enough to make the illusion work. Similarly, the grass is also affected by the wind, but the density is not particularly high. The closer I got to the forest, the more plants I came across. And I also came across a residential area with huge houses, a far cry from the apartments and something worth returning to later. Once I did reach the forest, I felt a little underwhelmed. I guess I expected a bit more density than what I got. But hey, there's more trees than you'd find elsewhere in the game, so that's gotta count for something. It's still pretty and very quiet compared to the city, so I get why it's a popular hiking and camping spot. Anyway, back to the houses from earlier. This is the Ahead housing complex, consisting of smart homes that people outside are protesting for reasons that will make sense if you play the game. Not only are these houses lavish, but there's security bots roaming around outside, and the post boxes are meant for drones to deliver your mail. You can quickly tell by the architecture that this place is modern, with simple, sleek shapes and futuristic-looking streetlights. The houses look similar in terms of them all essentially being gray blocks with wooden details, but it's not as dystopian as it sounds thanks to the huge amount of plants and the landscapers who take good care of them. It's actually a gorgeous area, and you can tell that the price people must pay to live here reflects that through the objects we find. Every home has an outdoor kitchen alongside other nice furniture, but there's not really any personal clutter here. The only signs of this place being inhabited, aside from NPCs themselves and the sounds they make, are the cars and the driveways, as well as some outdoor kitchens that have been used, judging by the low poly food on top. While we're on the topic of pricey homes, let's move on from San Francisco to Silicon Valley, Palo Alto in particular. In real life, this is one of the most expensive places to live in all of the US due to its proximity to high-paying tech giants as well as Stanford University. The center itself doesn't really have many places to live and mostly consists of shops and other public places. There's probably a few living units above some of these, but considering there's not that many high-rise buildings here, it seems most people who reside in the area have homes on the outskirts. There's a neighborhood here with houses much smaller than the ones at the Ahead housing complex, but with a lot more individuality. Not only are they painted in different colors, but personal touches make a return, with stuff ranging from flamingo statues to basketball hoops. The area is very calm and quiet, and while the houses may not be as impressive, you gotta remember that you're in Silicon Valley and not on the outskirts like the complex. Owning a house here, especially with a family, as indicated by the toys and playgrounds in the area, requires a lot of money, which makes it interesting that just down the street, there's a gang hideout. You'd think a place like this, where high-earning families live, would be safe, especially since this hideout is right in between Palo Alto and San Mateo, another area where families seem to live and that boasts even bigger houses. Some of them even have pools, it's very fancy. As a contrast, I wanted to go to a low-income neighborhood, but first, as it was dark out again, I made my way to Rhonda's restaurant down south, as it's pretty lively in the nighttime. This is a restricted area due to a biker gang having their base here, but we can still take a look at the exterior as well as hack the indoor security cams to take a peek. There are tons of bikes parked outside, but what you notice first is the red lighting, especially the huge neon sign. There's additional smaller signs advertising their alcohol selection, as well as of course trash, porta potties, a caravan, and an RV. Despite not being allowed inside, I can still hear the slightly muffled yet very loud music from out here. The natural environment has also changed from what we've seen prior. It's on the outskirts, just like Crestmont, but the area is more open and grows a distinctly different type of tree. The interior of Rhonda's is what you'd expect of a roadhouse bar, with wooden details and furniture, as well as signs and taxidermy on the walls. Of course, there's also bottles and plates of food everywhere. Sadly, it suffers a similar issue to the bar we entered earlier. There's not a lot of life in terms of NPCs, but at least there's more of them here. As the sun rose again, I made my way over to Prescott in northern Oakland. It's an area with a lot of crime and poverty, but one that's in the early stages of gentrification, so I wanted to see if I could find any signs of this. Even if I didn't already know what kind of place this is, it's evident right away as the houses here are visibly run down and covered in graffiti. There's a lot of junk everywhere, both on the streets and in gardens, as well as old posters on some walls and windows. You can hear cars and NPCs just as anywhere else, along with barking dogs and the occasional police siren. In the middle of all this, though, you can see a few signs of gentrification. Some houses are being renovated, as indicated by scaffolding and other building-related items, while some houses have already been restored and look very well kept in comparison to their neighbors. I'm sure a trendy new coffee shop will open up here any minute. Speaking of coffee shops, let's enter one. They do exist, just not here. South of Prescott, by the Oakland City Hall, there's a donut shop where you can get yourself some coffee. This is one of 2 coffee chains that provide some level of interactivity, meaning you can enter and drink coffee that doesn't affect you in any way. The exteriors of these shops are different from location to location, but the interiors are always the same. There are other coffee shops in the world, but you can't interact with these whatsoever. It's the same with bars and restaurants across the map. There's some you can enter and some that you can't. Despite there being a pretty big variety of restaurants, you're unable to eat food there and can only grab a drink. The kind of restaurant sometimes depends on where you are though. By the water, you'll mostly find ones that specialize in seafood, and the only place by Chinatown serves Asian food. Some interiors are special and differ from the rest, but they mostly look the same in their respective franchises, just like the coffee shops. As for bars, there's only 4 that you can actually enter, but due to the low amount, they're all vastly different from one another. Aside from the bar we visited earlier, one is a strip club with an 80s theme, one is a roadhouse-style bar similar to Rhonda's, and the last one is more of a restaurant if you ask me, but it's an upscale spot by the water. There's also interactable clothing shops, car dealerships, and pawn shops, as well as one place that sells sailboats. As for any other kind of store, they're simply there as set dressing, but the game definitely wouldn't have felt as alive without them. Some even have simple 3D interiors to add to the effect. There are just 2 more things I'd like to take a look at, one of which is, of course, animals. With a name like Watch Dogs 2, you'd expect dogs, and there's plenty of them. Big dogs, little dogs, gray dogs, beige dogs, dogs with green collars, dogs with blue, and they're all pettable. There's even guard dogs. Best game ever. For my cat lovers out there, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. However, can I interest you in some birds? There's pigeons on the streets and seagulls by the water, and when you approach them, they fly away. Third and last, they're sea lions. Like the seagulls, they're also by the water and also leave as you approach. No petting allowed. Worst game ever. It's not the biggest variety of animals, but seeing people walk their dogs and having birds fly overhead certainly adds to the average experience. The final thing I want to cover is vehicles. Just like with NPCs, you see a lot of them, and so variety is important. As I mentioned earlier, different cars have different sounds, but looks matter too. There's of course vehicles such as cop cars and ambulances, but also vehicles belonging to companies, big and small. For example, there are noodle cars and buses, as well as landscaping vans, food trucks, and taxis, even trucks, forklifts, and boats. Additionally, in San Francisco, you can find unrideable streetcars and rideable non-playable cable cars. Basically, there's a big variety, and you can drive almost all of them. The concentration of civilian vehicles is naturally higher, and these differ quite a bit in shape and size. They come in different colors, and some even have custom paint jobs, which is also a neat touch, although these aren't one of a kind as you'd expect. Going deeper, there's much else that varies from car to car, such as acceleration and handling, and this is actually way more detail than I thought. If you're interested, the wiki is your friend. While I am wrapping it up here, I do feel like there's much more to cover, judging by the size of the map and how little of it I've gone over. There's big spots of greenery, a bunch of streets, and landmarks to visit, each with their own little details and sounds. You can also traverse the water, and I'm sure there's things to find out there too. Despite not zooming in on absolutely everything the game has to offer, we've still found many different things that set a precedent for what else might exist, some of which I've not even mentioned, such as the fact that sometimes while walking past, you can hear what's going on inside the homes, like TV shows playing, babies crying, and couples arguing. The little details are worth bringing attention to. Everything from trash to garden statues, as well as the varying architectural styles depending on the surrounding area. Of course, objects are repeated. Not many things in video games are entirely unique, but the way they're used is what matters and what makes it feel organic. Like finding a house with thriving flowers and gardening tools, versus an overgrown lawn with an abandoned doghouse and a swing set. By using our imagination, we find that these two places tell two entirely different stories. And what is life really if not our own personal stories? Thank you for watching.